Welcome back to another episode of Harmonious at Lunch, the show that fuels your business success. I'm Brandon Gano, your host and guide through the world of harmonious business growth. Today, we're unlocking powerful strategies with industry experts to help your business thrive. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or executive, you are in the right place. Join me and our incredible guests today on the journey to clarity, growth, and success. It is time to revolutionize your approach to business. Let's dive in with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Welcome back into some more bite-sized business advice. And today we got a conversation about your ego. Your ego is not your amigo. This is a topic that I'm sure we could spend hours on, but we're going to have as much as we can in 15 minutes with an incredible guest, an accomplished entrepreneur, and a little bit of a crazy guy. He skydives and climbs rocks, and we'll see where that comes in with the ego. But Christian Espinosa, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Brandon. Appreciate it.
So your extreme sports, needless to say, I will not be participating with you outside of my comfort zone. I don't think that has anything to do with my ego, but I want to hear about this conversation of your ego is not your amigo. You do all these crazy things. You've grown companies. You sold companies. Where was this conversation brought to the forefront for you? How early in your career?
I think I first heard of this topic probably with my first cybersecurity company. I think business and entrepreneurship is really personal development, kind of wrapped in the context of business. So it forces you to grow if you want to grow your business. I think the business is a reflection of the entrepreneur that started the business or the person running the business. And with my first business, I had a lot of struggles, as most people with a business, especially their first one. And I would keep doing the same thing and tell myself I knew this stuff, and I was afraid to admit I didn't know things and ask for help. And there's entrepreneur groups out there, and I joined a couple of them, like Vistage is one of them. It's a executive level peer-to-peer group. And I would show up to meetings, I wouldn't admit that I couldn't figure something out. And I thought, man, this is not serving me, and why am I doing this? So I finally put my ego aside and would just say, you know what? I need help with how to figure out a compensation plan for my sales team, as an example. And then people would chime in, and I would come up with a solution. So it took me a long time to admit that I didn't know things though. And I think that's the ego coming in, because for me, the ego is trying to protect my identity of someone that has stuff figured out. But I did have it figured out to a certain degree, but not to get to the next level of my business. So I had to put that aside, my ego aside.
Yeah, I have to go back to something you said at the very beginning. You said the business is the reflection of the person who started it or who's running it. I've never heard that said before. And that took me a second to just digest. I mean, what do people hear? Is that an ego response when people hear that and get defensive or shocked? I mean, that's such a reflective statement of where people are in their businesses. And I don't know that it always comes across or for everyone, it would come across the same way. So I'm curious, have you said that to people and they've kind of gotten defensive about that?
I have, and that is an ego response. I think I've studied a lot of neurolinguistic programming, a lot of personal development things, and I think ultimately our life is a mirror of ourselves. Our outer world is a mirror of our inner world. So if we don't have things together internally, it's going to show up externally, right? And yeah, if we get defensive about that, I think that is the ego, because we don't want to admit that we don't have things figured out. And one of the challenges with business is it takes a different skill set to get to $1 million than it does to get to 3 million or 10 million. And when I say the business is a reflection of the owner, if you continually do the same things that got you to 1 million and expect to get to 3 million, it's not going to work. And your ego is going to try to protect that. Like, oh, I know how to do this. I'm going to keep doing the same things. But you have to unlearn certain things and learn new things. And that's admitting that you don't know how to get to the next level. So you have to learn those new skills. And that's what's great about business and entrepreneurship is you always have to learn something new, and you always have to evolve to get to the next level. And I've even told people on my team people always want to be promoted to a certain position. And I'm like, well, that position requires you to grow to a certain degree. And if you don't grow to that degree, you're not going to be in that position. because that requires a different skill set, a different mindset, a different leadership set of skills, just a different way of thinking. So, I try to make that clear. Like the position is not guaranteed unless you're able to evolve with the company as well.
Yeah. No, that's a sobering reality for a lot of people, I'm sure. This conversation of personal development and business growth, obviously it makes complete sense. I think anyone who's been an entrepreneur for more than 5 minutes realizes that do we do it is a totally different conversation. But for you, is there also a crossover in you do all these extreme activities? Have you up leveled the intensity or anything in line with that as you've also grown your business? I'm curious if that side of your life has kept up to a degree as you've grown.
Well, I think it's constantly evolving. uh, like I, I haven't climbed a mountain in a while. I've done two of the seven summits, and one of the things about mountaineering and ego, since we're talking about ego, is I've known a lot of people that have done Denali, for instance, and they get what's called summit fever. It's their ego involved. Like I got to summit no matter what. And the weather conditions are not the right conditions to summit. So I've known people that have gone for the summit, ended up getting a storm came in, they got frostbite, they lost part of their ear, part of their nose, finger. And that was all the ego. They should have put that aside and said, you know what? I'll summit some other day. So with me right now, I'm doing kind of race car driving. I drive, been driving fast cars and sort of training for this F4 experience. And I have to constantly keep my ego in check because I always want to get the fastest lap time. But at my current skill level, to get the fastest lap time, I'm probably going to wreck. So I've got to like step back, put my ego aside, and say, you know what? I'm still in this learning phase. I've got to like accept that I may not be the fastest right now, but if I learn as much as I can, then I can get faster next time and faster next time and faster next time. But if I try to push it right now, I'm probably going to spin the car out or run into a barrier or run into the desert. And that's not going to serve anybody. So it's this constant thing. I think it's like this with anything. You have to balance your skill set with what your ego, and then also realize what your ego is doing and how it's impacting your life. And I think there's a place for your ego, but typically it's not your ego, as I said, because it's not often serving us. It's really protecting this identity we've made for ourselves, and sometimes that identity is holiness at a glass ceiling, and we don't even know it. That's why it's called a glass ceiling. Can't see it.
Yeah. How does somebody go from wherever they are now? Because a lot of times you're not aware of where your ego is showing up. And I think that's in business most prominent with when you see people doing the same activities over and over, but saying they want to grow. And we talked about this a couple of minutes ago.
Mhm.
That's your basically your ego getting in the way. That's your identity. How do you start to identify when that's happening? And then also that second step of saying, well, now what? So how did you balance that, or how do you continue to balance that over the course of your career?
I do a lot of self-reflection. I look at like where I am, where I want to go, and what needs to shift. And I also look at the past, like if I had a relationship that fell apart or I lost a deal for some reason, I look at that. But I look at it through the lens of what was my role in that, not blaming the person I was dating at the time, or not blaming the client or the prospect for not going with us. I look at what was my role and what could I have done differently, because that's the only thing I can change is me. I can't change other people, but if I have the context of what was my role in this, and if I want to get to this next level, what do I need to change? Then that forces me to look at it from that perspective and make those changes. I don't have to make those changes, but if I don't make those changes, I have no reason to complain if I'm constantly having failed relationship, failed relationship, failed relationship. Not winning a deal, not winning a deal, not winning a deal. I can't just keep pointing the finger externally. I have to look at like what is my role and be willing to make the change. I think one of the biggest challenges, we all often know what to do, but doing it is the challenge. Change is a simple concept, but it's not easy for us to do that. And that's the ego coming away. It wants to hold us back and say, "Oh, you don't need. You're fine the way you are." And we also have these stories we tell ourselves that reinforce that we are where we are and we're good enough and all this stuff. So it's a lot of dynamics that come in, but the bottom line is the thing we're going towards has to be compelling enough to make us want to make those shifts. And we have to mentally get on board with that and tell ourselves whatever we need to tell us to make us make those changes. And it
Mm.
seems simple, like I said, it seems simple, but I'm sure you know many people that have had 17 relationships that have all failed for the same reason. And they have not taken one moment to reflect and think, what was my role in this and what should I change? Every time they blame the other person. And then they get in the next relationship, blame the other person. It's the same thing with business.
Yeah. No, I heard that stat about marriages too. If 50% of first marriages end in divorce, whatever the number is, the
Yeah.
likelihood a second marriage ends in divorce is 70%, and then it goes up to like 90% for the third. And it's this pattern, right? Over and over. And it's the same in business. If something isn't working, you're less and less likely to have it be successful the second, third, and fourth time. What's the difference though between ego and confidence? And also, I guess arrogance gets more on the side of ego, but a lot of people will say like, "Oh, he's that guy's so arrogant, that girl's so arrogant." Um, it might just be confidence. How do you walk that fine line?
So I think confidence doesn't need to be broadcasted. Number one. Uh, I think you can be quietly confident. You don't need to tell everybody or broadcast it, which is that arrogance. And then I think confidence comes from competence. So in order to be confident, you have to develop the competence, which means putting the time into something, and not that it's behind closed doors. So when you show up, you don't have to have this need to talk over people and tell everybody how smart you are or tell people how you operate with integrity. It's just you, and it exudes from you. It's who you are. That to me is the confidence. I think the arrogance and the ego is when you're not really confident and you're not really competent and you're posturing basically. Like if somebody, and I had this come up recently, somebody was having this conversation with me and they told me probably 6 times in the conversation how they were trustworthy and how they operate with integrity. And then I looked at their actions and they're questionable. And I'm thinking that last thing they did was not really that trustworthy. So it's like if you are really trustworthy and do have integrity, you don't have to broadcast it. If you're a great leader, you don't have to tell everybody you're a great leader. You just show up with that. And that to me is confidence.
That's like what you were saying before, right? Where your outer world is a reflection of your inner world. I think I've seen this, and I'm curious to hear your take on it, where exactly that scenario, somebody will repeatedly say something about themselves in order to get you to believe it, but it's actually the opposite of how they act.
Yes. Typically. Yes.
Yeah, it's I know there's a name for it. It's escaping my mind at this very moment, but um
It's called
anyway, in terms
delusion.
it is called delusion. There's like a principle that it's
All
called. But yes,
right.
that is the definition of delusion. I understand that. Um, is there ever the topic is your ego is not your amigo? Is there ever a situation where, when well trained or well disciplined, your ego could be your amigo?
I think so. If you can sort of tame your ego, and for me, as I mentioned, I'm very competitive, and my ego like embraces that. So it helps me get better at things, but I have to keep it in check because if I, like I said, try to push the limit on a car I'm driving and I wreck, then that's going too far. But my ego is always like looking at somebody else's time and saying, how can I beat that time? Right. So as long as I can use that in a way that is serving me and not just going like, balls to the wall and wrecking because I'm so hell bent on beating that time, that would be my ego taking over. But if I can say, oh, my ego really wants me to, get better and beat this time and be number one on this, results. Then if I can say, apply like the skill set to get there and I come up with a way to get better to serve the ego, then that is a way that it is my amigo. But I have to, like I said, keep it balance of it, keep it in check.
Hmm. How do you help the people on your team and around you also develop this mindset? Because it's one thing for you as the leader, of course, to keep your ego in check and understand where you're at. But once those people are inside your organization, because it's hard, you don't really know this about somebody until you get to know them.
Right.
How do you help them realize that your ego is not your amigo and also keep it in check so that the whole team and company grows?
I have to look for situations where I can apply some feedback. And I give people a lot of latitude in my business, but I'm there to oversee things and kind of like help them grow, right? I mean, I believe in helping people evolve and get to the next level as well. And then when there's opportunities that show up, I will provide some feedback. Like if somebody that they get super defensive in a meeting because their ego is being bruised a little bit, then I will have a conversation with them. And often the conversation is simply like look at the world through somebody else's lens. You know, we often get trapped into thinking everyone sees the world the same way we do, but everyone has a different model of the world. And when we understand that, we can like say, "Oh, this is Brandon's model of the world," and I'm going to communicate a little bit differently based on how I think. I'm pretty sure he sees the world. And when we understand that, that requires us to take the ego out of the equation. When we understand that, it makes us much better communicators. It makes us much better partners. It just makes us better in life in general. But that again requires the ego to be removed, and that is probably the biggest challenge I've had in business is training people to see the world through somebody else's lens versus their own. Because we often get so wrapped up in our own story, our own view, and we don't want to have somebody call us out on something, you know. But typically, that's not the problem. The problem is we're not communicating in a way that resonates with somebody else and how they understand the world.
Yeah, are there in terms of if a disagreement comes up or in a meeting, whatever it is, behind closed doors, is there an exercise you've taken people through to get them to do that, even if it's just one on one with you and the person, to say, "Hey, let's explore the way that Christian sees the world, or the way that this person sees the world." Have you ever gone through that process with people?
I have. What I often do, and there's a number of ways to sort of do this, is I ask the person I'm communicating with. A recent example was with a client. There was one person from the client's team. We'll call him Bob, and there was somebody on my team. We'll call him Tom. And there was some friction between the two. So then later, I talked to Tom, and I asked Tom to how if Bob was Tom, how Bob would see the world and see this situation. So it's a little bit reverse what people often do. They often, you know, try to put themselves in someone else's shoes, but I ask him to put Bob in his shoes. So now he's communicating, you know, how he thinks Bob acts, but through his own lens, right? And I start the exercise that way, and that opens the door a little bit for, and often, you know, pretty shortly after that, a light bulb might go off, right? But it's just a way to shifting how we're looking at a scenario. Another tool for this is the Crucial Conversations framework. There's a book called Crucial Conversations that covers this, and we're often shooting for a shared goal. It's just how we get there, and looking at, like I said, the lens that other people have. Those are a couple of things I've done.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. In terms of how you've seen this effect in your companies, you've sold a company, you're growing another one. Um, what's been the difference when you make this a focus of not only yourself personally, but helping your organization grow by putting our egos aside and being mission first and outcome first? Can you compare that to a time where it wasn't a priority for you?
Yeah, I wrote about this in my first book. In my first cybersecurity business, I didn't work on these things for a while in my company, and almost all of our clients were transactional.
Mm,
Like they would pick us for one project, and then that was it. My team wasn't very cohesive. There's a lot of friction because people are always looking for an opportunity to outsmart somebody. So when I did the emotional intelligence training and made people aware of the ego, my revenue grew because clients became relationship based. They actually started liking us because they liked working with us. And They would take that one project and sign an annual contract later. My team was more cohesive because they got to understand how other people on the team see the world and see it as a positive thing versus a negative thing. See, like, we need people that have different perspectives on a team to have a great team versus, oh, they don't think like me, so whatever. That's the ego, right? So once I made all those changes, I had a less stressful environment, more collaborative environment, and my revenue grew because our clients liked us much more. Because if we put our ego aside, we're not trying to talk over a client's head. We're not trying to point out how a client doesn't know something, but we do. We're trying to understand, let's work with a client. And this is someone that we want to have a relationship with. We want to make it be harmonious versus friction based.
It's a good term to use. Where'd you come up with that word, harmonious? You must be a smart guy. Kidding. Christian, this is fantastic. There's so much to unpack here, and a lot of work that's really never ending. I'm sure you agree with that this is a lifelong pursuit, is it not?
It ends when I'm dead, basically. Yeah. Yes, it is a
There you go.
lifelong pursuit.
So for the audience, where should they go to learn more about you? You mentioned a book, but where's the best place to learn more about what you got going on?
Yeah, my website, christianespinosa.com. And my books are available on Amazon and most booksellers, and also on Audible if you like to listen to books as well.
Awesome. I appreciate that. So for those of you watching and listening, the website, all of the websites and the book links are going to be down below in the show notes. You can go check those out. Christian, I can't let you go without one final question. And we believe here that powerful questions get powerful answers.
Yes.
So in terms of a question that you want the listener to ask themselves and dwell on until they get the powerful answer, this whole conversation about the ego is not your amigo, right? What is a powerful question someone can take away from this episode and think about until they get an answer that's going to change the way they see this conversation in their own life?
A powerful question is, what is the story I'm telling myself, and how do I change that story?
That is a good question. I like that a lot. Christian, thank you for being here. This is a fantastic episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
For those of you watching, listening, again, all the links, everything down below, go check it out. But also make sure you subscribe. We want to have you back on tomorrow's episode of Harmonious at Lunch. We put these episodes out 5 days a week because we're a little crazy, but also we want to help you grow your business, build a more harmonious business and life, just like Christian said, of course. We'll see you tomorrow.